and that's very likely, even though Omicron appears to be milder.
Scotland's hospitality sector, meanwhile, is stepping up its call for financial support after the government there reintroduced COVID restrictions. Businesses say they're seeing mass cancellations and will need help to survive Christmas. The government is now considering tighter measures after new self-isolation rules came into force. Paul Waterson, a spokesperson for the Scottish Licensed Trade Association, says he's shocked and worried about what it'll do to businesses.
Came as a bolt of the blue for us. We had geared up, many people had got food in and so on, and was geared up for a really busy weekend. This is the worst scenario we could have. We're open, but people are being told not to come in. It takes us back to the very beginning of all this, when you might remember that the Prime Minister said that pubs would stay open, but people shouldn't go in them.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has been accused of leading a culture of disregard for COVID rules. That's after a new image emerged of Boris Johnson taking part in an online Downing Street quiz, flanked by his colleagues during last year's lockdown. There was no evidence of social distancing in the image and masks weren't being worn. At the time, London was in Tier 2, which meant there should have been no mixing of households indoors, apart from support bubbles. Labour's deputy leader, Angela Rayner, says he's unfit to lead the country, and some people in Nottinghamshire agree.
I really do think that he is making a lot of mistakes. I don't think he should be in government. I'm not sure that I think the Conservative Party should be in government, to be honest. They've all broken so many rules.
Well, I think it's wrong what they did, and, you know.
If he doesn't do anything, he's going to get blamed, and if he does something, he's going to get blamed anyway, innit?
I don't see anybody else to lead the country, really, at the moment. There's no other leaders out there.
The Kentucky governor in the United States says morgues in the town of Mayfield are struggling to keep up with victims after a series of powerful tornadoes ripped through the state. More than 100 people are feared dead across 6 states, where at least 80 were killed in Kentucky, in what's been described as one of the largest tornado outbreaks in US history.
It's like nothing any of us have ever seen before, even in a movie or on TV. It is that devastating. I mean, homes totally gone, and the people inside them totally gone too. This is something so devastating.
The Foreign Secretary has promised a further £75 million in aid to Afghanistan. It follows discussions at the G7 meeting in Liverpool about what can be done about the worsening humanitarian situation in the country. We'll have more later. See you then.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking largely dry across England and Wales, with rain clearing from Northern Ireland and southern Scotland. Southwest England will often be cloudy through this afternoon, with perhaps the odd spot of drizzle, turning increasingly windy across the far west, but very mild for the time of year. Over to southeast England, and it should remain mostly dry here this afternoon, with just a few glimmers of sunshine for a lucky few. Moving over to Cardiff, there'll be a lot of cloud across Wales, particularly in the north and west. Some sheltered eastern spots may see a little sunshine. Across the Midlands and into northwest England, it will be drier this afternoon compared to this morning, with spells of sunshine developing. Highs will reach around 13 Celsius, which is 55 in Fahrenheit. In the northeast, patchy rain will continue to move northwards away from Newcastle and the surrounding areas. Some brighter skies moving in from the south. Highs reaching around 11 Celsius with generally light southerly winds. Northern Scotland will remain bright for a little longer, with a few showers around. However, thicker cloud in the south, along with outbreaks of rain, will move north later. It'll also continue to become brighter across Northern Ireland as the afternoon moves on. However, it will become very windy as we move into this evening, highs of 12 Celsius. Turning wet and windy across the northwest of the UK this evening, drier elsewhere but breezy and mild. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good morning, you're watching GB News. Coming up today on The Political Correction, well, what a week it's been for the Prime Minister, and what a week ahead. He's got a big vote coming up on Tuesday on tighter restrictions. There are currently 65 rebel MPs planning to vote against, and one of them is right here.
Yeah, I'll give my reasons why in a moment, but also we'll be discussing whether talk of mandating vaccines could become a reality.
We're a full house today with Paul Embry and Arlene Foster joining us in the studio. Good morning, you're watching GB News. This is The Political Correction, and I'm Nigel Farage.
And I'm Deanna Davison.
Also joining us in the studio today, Arlene Foster and Paul Embry.
We're here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
Coming up in this hour, the Tories divided. 65 MPs plan to rebel in a vote against further restrictions this Tuesday. The Sunday Mirror has published a picture of Boris during a Zoom quiz last year, but half the country was doing the same. Well, certainly on Zoom it was. Plus, it's reported that NHS staff have been told to start vaccinating 5-year-olds. More on that later.
Well, don't forget to get involved in the conversation by emailing us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. This is The Political Correction.
So the Cabinet Office is investigating 3 alleged gatherings, that's the new word that's being used, gatherings at Downing Street, including a Christmas party on the 18th of December last year during lockdown. And even this morning, the Mirror are pushing further with a picture of the Prime Minister hosting a Downing Street quiz, calling it rule-breaking. So, Deanna, it's been the most extraordinary week. And I have a feeling the 18th of December is the big one, and Dominic Cummings saying that pictures will inevitably come out. Very interesting to see some of the newspapers being far less critical of that gathering than others, because I assume from that their political journalists were there. So I know, and I'm pretty sure of it too.
Maybe so.
But, you know, you're there in the middle of it all as a Conservative Member of Parliament. What do you make of it all?
I'm certainly not there at the parties, and I don't think I'll be getting any invitations anytime soon, given the fact I'll be rebelling again on Tuesday. But it has been quite the week. I mean, you know, last Christmas was so hard for so many people. So to see reports of kind of alleged parties is really difficult. You know, so many people were making such sacrifices to stick to the rules, to try and keep their family safe, their community safe. And, you know, obviously we need to wait and see what the Cabinet Office investigation says, but it seems pretty clear that there was stuff going on that shouldn't have been going on. I
mean, this Cabinet Office investigation, I'll tell you what, I'll sort it out in 45 minutes. All you need to do is ask 2 or 3 of the key people, and we already know that Jack Doyle was there and gave out prizes, and then you go to the security gate at the entrance to Downing Street, where you get the times that the name's in and the times that the name's out. To say it's going to be investigated is a way of trying to kick it into the long grass. Arlene, what hurts the Prime Minister more? Is it the fact that it's do as I say, not as I do for the Downing Street gang? Or is it just the clear, and it's interesting, isn't it? We don't use the word lie very often in public life in this country. It's sort of one of those nasty words, and yet it's now being openly used, not just by the Labour Party, but by lots of even conservative commentators saying the man has a problem with lying. What hurts more? Is it the hypocrisy, the double dealing, or is it the inability to own up?
Well, it depends what you're talking about. Obviously, if you're talking about COVID messaging, it's the hypocrisy that hits hardest, because people hate being told to do something if they think that the people who make the laws are doing something different. Absolutely detest it. And we experienced that in Northern Ireland when Sinn Féin went to a huge funeral, whilst other people were being limited to 20 people at a funeral, and that caused a huge furore in Northern Ireland and did have an impact in terms of compliance, in terms of people abiding by the rules. And up until then, it had been really, really good, the compliance in Northern Ireland. So it depends what you're talking about. In terms of Boris's future, I think it's his colleagues that he has to be most concerned about, because Boris was elected leader despite people knowing of his shortcomings, because he cut through that terrible phrase. People liked him. They wanted to vote for him. People who weren't interested in politics wanted to vote for him. Look at all of the red wall seats. Deanna knows all of that. But if his colleagues think that that is now on the wane or is being damaged, then that's a problem.
The asset becomes a liability.
Correct.
And therefore... It was interesting because actually at the start of 2019, he was very unpopular in even amongst the Eurosceptics, because at the third time of asking, he buckled and backed Mrs May's deal. So it was amazing how quickly.
Yeah, but again, I mean, quickly he can come up again. I mean, this is the point I'm making. But I actually don't think we're at the point where colleagues are going to move at him at the moment. But I think that he has to get a grip. He really does have to get a grip now.
There was a famous phrase, Paul, towards the end of 13 years of Conservative rule in the early mid-1960s, Macmillan government, never again glad, confident morning. And that was as after 13 years of Tory rule, it was all going wrong, and the night of the long lives, and then Wilson wins the 64 election, albeit with a small majority. I mean, you know, Arlene's speculated about whether he can bounce again. I don't think he can bounce, do you?
I'm sceptical as well. I think when you're a Prime Minister, once your moral authority has gone, it's very, very difficult to get it back. Now, some people may say that his moral authority hasn't quite disappeared yet. Well, I think among large parts of the electorate, it probably is on its way out. And I think this has done huge damage. I mean, my view is that it's the hypocrisy that gets you in the end on stuff like this. I mean, in a sane world, I think a breach of social distancing regulations would be seen as a minor infraction, a bit like driving at 35 miles an hour in a 30 miles an hour zone. The problem is this, with that comparison. If the government had held a daily press conference telling people you must not drive at 35 miles an hour in a 30 miles an hour zone, if they'd launched a huge publicity campaign about it and were drilling it into us day after day, and one of them got caught driving at 35 miles an hour, then it becomes a major infraction because people say, well, you're a hypocrite. Exactly what you were telling us not to do and drilling it into us, you're now doing yourself.
It all reminds me of back to basics and family values, which are major and it all fell to pieces.
I think the problem, though, Nigel, I think you hit on it, it's you know, we heard that there was potentially a party, it was about a week ago now. I think did we not talk about it on the show last week? And then there was complete denial, no, absolutely not, you know, all rules were followed, all guidance was followed. Own up. It's Dominic Cummings all over again, just own up.
I mean, the problem is this, isn't it? Twice he's told the House of Commons, in response to Keir Starmer, twice he's told the House of Commons there was no party. Now, if it turns out he does know that something took place, that's pretty serious.
He's got an honesty problem, I have to say. I mean, I saw him up close when he was the Mayor of London. I, at the time, was the Regional Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union in London, and he was responsible, ultimately, for London's fire service. And I knew, and firefighters knew, and members of the public knew, that he wasn't being straight with them over certain stuff. But in the chamber at City Hall, you can get away with that sort of stuff because the national media isn't necessarily focusing on it. I think the problem, and I think that's his history, actually. I think that's the history of the man. The problem is when you're in the hot seat in number 10, then all of a sudden, you know, people go through every statement with a fine-tooth comb and you can't get away with dishonesty. And he does spin lines and he's disingenuous and he gets caught out. And I think these things are now piling up on him.
Well, the Mirror, who, of course, support the Labour Party, the Sunday Mirror, have published this picture today, and it's of him hosting some sort of Christmas quiz, and the guy next to him is dressed up in tinsel. We don't know how many people were in the room. Their excuse is that mostly it was on Zoom. I don't think this one particularly hits very hard.
No.
But I tell you what is interesting, and that was watching Keir Starmer on Wednesday at Prime Minister's Questions. Now, I don't think he has a terrific cut-through with the public in terms of his persona, but I thought the words that he used were actually rather impressive. You know, when he asked that question, does the Prime Minister have the moral authority to lead the country? I thought Starmer was bang on the money. Now, there's an absolute slew of opinion polling that has come out over the course of the last 48 hours, and a couple of interesting things to note. The Labour lead is put at between 6 and 9%, according to which company you look at. That's interesting. But I also thought what was interesting was Reform UK, led by my colleague Richard Tice, was showing on 7%. I thought both were very, very interesting numbers to look at. A good week for Starmer, or could he have done better?
Well, a good week in terms of the polls, unquestionably, and I agree with you, I think, in terms of his performance at PMQs. But ultimately, if Labour is going to have a chance of winning the next election, this lead in the opinion poll has got to be sustained. It may just be a temporary blip, and I fear that it possibly is. And if Boris Johnson is manoeuvred out of 10 Downing Street, then the Tories will see a bounce from any new leader. So, I mean, if you look at opposition parties that have come to win general elections, they have had leads in the opinion polls over a sustained period of time. Labour is only at the foot of that mountain at the moment, and you know it's been a very, very bad couple of weeks for the government. So I'm not taking great heart in the opinion polls.
No, but interestingly, a YouGov poll found that public confidence in the government has fallen to 24%, with 55% saying they disapproved of the government's record to date. Deanna, from 2010 onwards, we saw David Cameron take the Conservative Party in, not only into coalition with the Lib Dems, but also into very much a sort of social democrat centre ground piece. And Clegg told me years later, he said, Nigel, Cameron was obsessed with you. Not a day went by. He wasn't asking, what the hell is Farage up to? As we started to eat, and it wasn't just the Conservative vote, but their perception was the Conservative vote. And I noticed something similar going on here. You've got, in many ways, I mean, you weren't there, but in many ways, the same kind of people in Parliament rebelling against their own Prime Minister, now potentially an outside party that would be seen to be a bit to the right of the Conservatives. I mean, how much of an issue is this?
I think the issue is this trust point, isn't it? The YouGov poll that you've just mentioned there. You need the trust of the electorate, at least to some extent. And we're politicians. Of course, we're not trusted. I think that the recent sort of survey of different professions, we weren't bottom, but I think we were second from bottom.
I'm
in terms
surprised
of
you
how,
weren't bottom.
I know.
That's amazing.
Can I just say firefighters are very highly trusted?
All right, not to show off or anything, but I think this is a thing, and you know we're seeing it play out in terms of COVID restrictions at the moment, in the sense that you need people to trust in what it is that you're saying, to really buy in, to adhere to the rules, adhere to the regs. I'm worried that on COVID regs that's not going to happen this Christmas if further restrictions are put into place. And certainly, if anything is said that you can't see your family for Christmas, I can't picture even a majority of the public.
Do you know, I was out on Friday night. I was out on Friday night at a busy venue. Not the sort of thing I do very often these days, but a lot of younger people. You know,
we believe you.
You know, no, I don't. It's difficult being me, I promise you. But a lot of mid-20s to mid-30s people out on a Friday night having fun. And that was the overwhelming response from people, is whatever they tell us to do, we're not listening anymore. And that is, and you mentioned the compliance point, and you'd seen this with Sinn Féin. Compliance, Paul, is now an issue, isn't it? Respect for the law is now an issue.
And I think the problem is the Coronavirus Act is coming up for, it's going to expire in March 2022. Now, I think there's every chance Parliament is going to seek to extend the Coronavirus Act. And the problem then, I think, is that every time there's and there will be future variants of this thing, you know, there's being no doubt. Are we going to hand power to the government indefinitely into the future every time there's a new variant to say we are issuing an immediate edict saying you've got to wear masks, you can't go here, you can't go there? That's the problem. And I think we're at the point now where people, many millions of people are thinking we've got to draw the line.
Well, and of course it could go further because it's very interesting. This week's been fascinating. We've seen the Austrians to begin with, then the Germans talk not just about having to have COVID passports, which Europe has already, and which you're going to be voting on Tuesday. But actually about the concept of mandatory vaccines. And then Ursula von der Leyen, you know, the boss of the European Commission, basically saying this is now going to be European Union policy. Greece fining people over 60 who haven't got the vaccine. I mean, all of this, to me, utterly horrifying. And I've been saying all week, thank goodness we've left the European Union. Thank goodness we're not going to be dragged into this. And the most shocking thing of the week to me, and yet I don't think it got the coverage that it deserved in many ways because we were talking about passes.
There was so much news this week, wasn't there?
And speculation too. But the most shocking thing to me was when Boris Johnson said at that press conference, and I did view the press conference as being a big diversion, to be honest, from what was going on, but we should launch a national conversation about whether we're going to have mandatory vaccines in this country. I was utterly astonished, and I'll bet, Deanna, your gang were pretty amazed, weren't they?
Absolutely. There was real uproar when we saw that amongst, you know, friends, colleagues, backbenchers.
Do you think it was planned, Deanna, or do you think it was a throwaway line?
No, I hope not. I've had many people say, "Oh, he's done it as a shock factor to take away from the rest of the news to try and distract." I really don't think that was the case at all. I think have a conversation was a way to kind of say, "No, we'll talk about it, but And then we had obviously the Health Secretary come out and say he's opposed to the idea. Whether that will be sustained or not is a different matter. But
as he was to vaccine passports.
Absolutely. But you know, for what it's worth, my contribution to the national conversation is it would be an absolute outrage to introduce mandatory vaccination.
I can very easily see Mark Drakeford and Nicola Sturgeon saying, yes, we want mandatory vaccinations.
Yep,
likewise.
Because don't forget what's happening in those regions at the moment. We are ahead in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales in terms of restrictions. You're talking about vaccine passports in England. We have them.
Yeah.
The rest of the UK has them. So I actually think that Michael Gove has this meeting with Mark Drakeford, Nicola Sturgeon and the First and Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland. And I would imagine that the majority on that call will be saying we need to have that conversation.
Yeah.
What we're seeing is a power grab by government, which is unprecedented, really. Now, OK, we can have a debate about whether or not it's justified, but there is no doubt that the government has arrogated to itself this sort of sweeping and arbitrary powers to, you know, instruct us to tell us where we can go, who we can speak to, whether we can, you know, work, whether we have to work from home, etc. The sort of thing we haven't seen since wartime.
Yeah.
And the left traditionally has always challenged that sort of establishment power, or at least has been very, very uneasy about it. But I'm afraid that Labour is completely gung-ho on some of this stuff. And the danger, as I say, is if you then see the extension of the Coronavirus Act, you then see indefinitely the government exercising this power well into the future.
On other issues than COVID.
On other issues. And actually the Labour Party, I don't think is on this issue speaking for all working class people.
No.
I think there are communities out there that are deeply uneasy with what's going on.
No, I completely agree. Well, stay tuned, because after the break, we will speak to the very influential Conservative commentator, Tim Montgomery.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Well, welcome back to the Political Correction here on GB News. Now, we've got some reaction coming into us. What have we got, guys?
We've got loads. So on the Prime Minister, Mark says Boris Johnson is single-handedly destroying the Conservative Party. The PM, in my opinion, was a political appointment to get Brexit done. Thank you for using our hashtag. That's now been achieved. He's broken manifesto promises. He's brought back sleaze into the headlines of the media and now alleged to have broken the COVID rules last Christmas. This is such an insult to every individual who followed the rules.
Yeah, so on Plan B, Alex says the travel industry and hospitality need to rebel against all of these restrictions.
And on COVID restrictions, Tim says we must have lost our minds or something far more sinister is underway and nobody seems to see it. We now want to vaccinate 5 to 11-year-olds too. This is all abhorrent as our vaccine passports.
And Charles says, when he's talking about politics and the state of it in this country, Mr Corbyn won the last election for the Conservatives, not Mr Johnson.
I don't quite buy that one, but I could write a thesis on that last election.
I think I'd rather help him
can I just
too.
say,
I'm not sure it was a good idea.
Can I just say, it's 2 years ago today. We haven't mentioned that on the show. 2 years ago today since the election.
Yeah, no, it was no. I mean, look, you know, it's very interesting, actually, this whole debate about party politics and Theresa May wants revenge and all the rest of it. But actually, I mean, I think I had a very major role in Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister. I mean, you know, the Brexit Party got rid of Mrs May. He was the natural inheritor, and we stood aside and let him get on with it. And he did. And to be fair, it wasn't a perfect Brexit. It was rotten for Northern Ireland, and it was rotten for fisheries. But actually, that sort of trench warfare that politics was in for all of those years,
it was awful,
is over.
Yeah.
So I still say thank goodness for that election.
Yeah. So should I be thanking you for my seat? Is that what you're...
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it was a big call, and I didn't want, to risk finishing up with a hung parliament and a second referendum. I mean, it would have been awful. So there are still things, about Boris that, you know, he has done some good things.
And he still hasn't thanked you formally. He hasn't stuck you in the Lords or anything like that, Nigel, has he?
No, well, thank God for that.
I got in so much trouble for saying you should get a peerage when I first got elected.
No, they can't acknowledge anything, and they can't acknowledge anything. But the point is, you know, and I know there's issues to sort out, but the point is, we have at least on that one big issue moved on. And I think it's worth acknowledging that.
So that's us talking, but we've got more GB views. Let's hear from you. So on the Partygate, Paul says, I don't care about last year's Christmas parties. I want the government to focus on COVID today and to get us out of the pandemic. The past is the past. And I've had sort of a lot of similar things come through my inbox on that sort of vein, actually.
Yeah, and there's so much going on, actually, in big politics, and yet we're talking about when is a gathering a party.
Yes,
I mean, it is a bit bizarre. Anyway, on the COVID passport, Brian says, if we don't have COVID jabs and or passports and other countries do, then it is tough luck for non-compliance and won't be allowed to travel. No jab, etc., no travel.
And on the Labour Party, Carl says, why don't Labour vote against the Tory proposed vaccine mandates? Besides being shocking for the people, Labour would get huge support from the public.
And on mandatory vaccines, Barry says, forced injection or attempted injection would be an assault. What happens if someone chooses to physically resist? Look, I have to tell you, I just think with mandatory vaccines, I think European governments, the European Union, and if we dared ever contemplate it here, have actually bitten off more than they can chew. It would be a disaster. And suggested to me once that if anything over 3.5% of a population resist a law, actually the place becomes ungovernable.
Well, in Vienna over the past couple of days, there's been huge protests. Hundreds and thousands of people have turned out to protest against the mandatory vaccination.
Yeah, and we're on about 10 to 12% in this country who've not had the vaccine, and they're not going to get the vaccine.
And the thing is, I have to say,
we should respect that right.
I hate the atmosphere of interrogation. Where I mean, it's a medical intervention, as far as I'm concerned, is a deeply personal thing, and nobody should be under any pressure whatsoever to disclose whether or not they've had the vaccine, unless it's absolutely necessary for work purposes or something. Otherwise, it's your business, and it's your business alone. And the idea, I think, that you should be compelled to have a particular medical intervention because the government effectively saying we're going to stick this in your arm whether you want to have it or not is obscene.
And that is a debate we're going to be having on Tuesday for NHS staff, of course, because one of the votes we're having in Parliament is about mandatory vaccinations for NHS workers. So I'm sure that's going to be a really interesting debate as well. But on Tuesday, Boris Johnson may be forced to rely on Labour votes to put his Christmas COVID restrictions through. Joining us now is Conservative commentator and contributor for Reaction Live, Tim Montgomery. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning.
So, Tim, give us your stance. How many rebels are you expecting? Are you expecting more to come out? And what does it mean for Boris?
Well, yes, you're probably a better person to gauge your fellow MPs than myself. But, yeah, we've seen numbers of 50 to 60 Tory rebels, potentially more. And I think the overall mood in the Conservative Party has just been so exacerbated by all of the incompetence that we've seen in the last week, that the rebellion will be higher as a result of the sort of just general unhappiness inside the parliamentary party, as well as on the merits of the issue.
Well, Tim, you know, you've watched this for a long, long time. Can you believe, as a lifelong committed Conservative, that the government is putting forward, Conservative government is putting forward the concept of vaccine passports for England? You know, the idea that we may need to show a vaccine passport to go to the pub. And more significantly, that a Conservative government is talking about a national conversation on mandatory vaccines. How do you feel as a lifelong Conservative about those debates?
Well, every day at the moment, Nigel, the Conservative Party is offending me. It's incredibly hard. I'm a very proud supporter of the Conservative Party. I've given most of my adult life to seeing it flourish. But at the moment, whether it's, you know, I've been listening in on your conversation. You've been talking quite understandably about COVID and the controversy over Partygate. You just as easily could have been talking about the report that we had in the last week about the absolute shambles of the Afghanistan withdrawal. In many ways, the implications of that for people much more profound. We invaded a country and made all sorts of promises to the people of Afghanistan, particularly the translators that helped us in that conflict. And what we learned this week was that a massive incompetence meant that we left those many people behind, probably to their deaths. That probably, in a way, should be the top story. We had the story re-emerge about the Prime Minister's wallpaper. This has come very soon after the whole ethics debate that has engulfed the Prime Minister. So we have, at the same time, the ethics questions. We have the party's reputation for competence being shaken to its core. And the Conservative Party really is an electoral force because of its reputation for competence. Take that away, and it's very, very vulnerable at the next general election.
Tim, I mean, you know Boris Johnson well. You've been friends with Boris Johnson, and there's no doubt he's a good campaigner.
Not so much at the moment, but yes.
Well, I know. But, you know, we know he's a good campaigner. We know he's a great cheerleader. Is it time for the Conservative Party to say, Boris Johnson was very useful as our leader in 2019. He was a great asset to us, the point that Arlene was making earlier, but that actually the time has come to find somebody else?
I hesitate to go there. I haven't up until now. But the reality was a bargain was kind of entered into. We needed Boris to get Brexit over the line. We needed Boris to defeat Jeremy Corbyn. But I think the quid pro quo, if you like, was that he would do as he did when he was Mayor of London, surround himself with a first-class team and, you know, curtail some of his habits that we all know all too well, you know, he's vulnerable to. And I think what happened 2 years ago today, yes, the Tories won that remarkable general election. But in a way, I think that victory went to Boris's head. And he's actually thought that he almost could do anything, that he could defy the odds in that circumstance. He could defy the odds again and again. And so he's not really listened to advisors. He's not put the right people around him. The kind of cavalier attitude to the truth that Arlene sat round your table there is particularly familiar with has become, I'm afraid, a hallmark of this government. And so if he can't reform, and I'm beginning to fear he can't reform, then Nigel, yes, I think it probably is time for him to go. And I say that with huge regret because he's an extraordinary politician and the Conservative Party owes him a lot.
So, Tim, you spoke then about kind of advisors and the people that Boris sort of surrounds himself with and the contrast between what was going on in City Hall. Do you think Dominic Cummings was a huge issue for Boris? And do you think that sort of set the tone for his relationship with his advisors?
Well, I think what happened was that I was part of the transition arrangements before he became leader. And Eddie Lister, who was running his City Hall operation, basically took over a blank sheet of paper. There was no transition planning right up until the last few weeks before he became leader. And I think what Dominic Cummings provided with the whole Vote Leave operation was, don't worry about having anyone else, I'll do it all for you. And I think the Prime Minister got lazy. He obviously indulged Dominic Cummings too much. And that strategic mistake has never really been rectified ever since he became the Prime Minister.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for joining us this morning, giving your insights. Tim Montgomery there, Conservative commentator and basically expert on the Conservative Party, I'd say.
And was very frank, wasn't he?
Absolutely.
Very, very... I mean, he pretty much went all the way.
Well, I think he went a lot further than I expected him to go, Nigel, I have to say, because Tim was very good. In fact, I think he was a special advisor to Boris at one stage. Yeah. The question is whether Boris's good points outweigh his shortcomings. Everybody knows he has shortcomings, but they overlooked those shortcomings because he was a vote winner and he was able to get people elected, and that was and I thought it was very interesting. Michael Portillo was in the studio here in GB News during the week, and he said Boris needs to get a grip basically and bring in people around him. And you've heard Tim Montgomery saying something similar there. You know, to have that team around him. Eddie Lister was a very steady force in Downing Street. Of course, he's not there anymore. I saw some reports this week that he might be coming back, which I think would be a good thing. But he's in the House of Lords now, so I'm not sure how that would...
I think the competency argument is a very, very strong one that Tim mentioned. People expect a basic degree of competency, grip, as they call it. They want their government to have grip on fast-moving situations. Now, the thing about Tony Blair, for example, and he certainly wasn't my most popular Labour leader by any stretch of the imagination, but by and large, I think his governments were seen as being pretty competent. You know, when it came to Iraq was obviously a massive, massive blunder, but when it came to the big issues, there was a basic degree of, yes, we're able to handle this and get the country through it, even if people didn't necessarily like the decisions that he was making. I think when an electorate senses that the government is losing its grip and its ability to be able to manage the day-to-day sort of crises that government have to deal with, then it's very, very difficult to win that trust back. Major experiences.
Well, 16th of September.
Black Wednesday.
16th of September 1992, and the Conservatives lost their reputation for competence on the economy. And really...
The 97 election was decided on that day,
I think
on Black Wednesday.
No, I think
the moment the Tories lost, as you say, lost their reputation for economic competence, and we saw interest rates going through the roof, and then we saw record repossessions and bankruptcies, etc. Labour were pretty much...
Is this as big as that? Not quite, in my view?
I don't think it is. There's a question over grip, and I think the government is losing any reputation that it had for competency. There's also the big question of hypocrisy and moral authority, and I think they're slipping there as well. So they're in dangerous waters, I think.
So I want to hear from you. If you voted Conservative for the very first time, what are you thinking now? Would you vote Conservative again, or are you having second thoughts? Because I'm very curious, and as your views.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back, and lots more of your views coming in thick and fast. Deanna, you can kick off.
Go on. Well, I haven't got a sheet, so I'm going to steal that one from you. There we go. So on the Prime Minister, Martin says, unfortunately, I think this will be the end for Boris as Prime Minister. I just hope that the Conservative Party do not rush into making Rishi the next PM, as I feel he may be an excellent Chancellor, but I don't think he's a leader. It's one of the questions we get asked all the time, isn't it? As soon as a PM is in place, you get asked who's next.
Oh, yeah.
It must be awful.
It is awful. If you're the leader, let me tell you, it is awful.
I can imagine.
Who's going to come next?
Yeah.
And be careful what you wish for, is all I'm going to say. On the coming vote, Gloria says, why should the SNP get a vote on what happens in England? And that's something, you know, that and you could put into that, why should Northern Ireland MPs have a vote?
MPs.
Exactly.
The West Lothian question.
It is, absolutely.
Sam Diel raised many years ago. On the Prime Minister, Richard says, my view on the number 10 party is basically, I don't care. I isolated for my safety and that of my family, not for the Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister didn't wear a seatbelt, I still would, because it's for my safety. It's as if everyone thinks we all did the PM a favour, we helped him. No, we were protecting ourselves.
Interesting take.
Alan says, he's a bit of a joker, is Alan. He says, the best Christmas present for me would be for Deanna, Nigel, Ireland and Paul to run the country. Voices of reason, sanity and common sense. Alan, or whoever your responsible adult is. I think Alan has been at the mulled wine a bit early this Sunday morning.
Is that what they call a government of national unity?
I think it would be, yeah. It'd be quite something, wouldn't it?
It's not that bad yet, Alan, I promise you.
Well, back on Partygate, John says, the action of the government at these Christmas parties show that we have nothing to worry about with this alleged pandemic.
Well, that's one way to look at it. On the COVID restrictions, another John says the elephant in the room touched upon by Arlene is that we are all being whipped up into febrile resentment over COVID restrictions that are the least restrictive in not just the big players on the European mainland, but the rest of the UK. This is the point that England actually is behind the rest of the UK in restrictions. And this nonsense about vaccination of 5-year-olds, we do it all the time for a range of diseases. People talk about it as if it's some bizarre brain surgery. Could we just all grow up? There we go.
Yeah, well, we are going to talk about the vaccination of 5-year-olds.
Yeah.
On the Conservative Party, Audrey says, I sent this email to cancel my membership of the Conservative Party yesterday.
Yeah,
so you've lost Audrey.
And you've seen some of this, haven't you?
I have, unfortunately. It's really sad because, you know your local membership, you know who they are. And I've had a lot of people emailing me very concerned, saying they're really disappointed with certain things that the government's doing at the moment. But we have had quite a number of resignations over the past few weeks from our local membership, and I don't think Bishop Auckland Conservative Association is unique in that either. I imagine that's going on all over the country, which is deeply sad.
Yeah, and finally on this little round, let's have a referendum. Ian says on enforced vaccination.
Not another one.
Well, actually, no. I have to tell you, and I my views on the political class in Westminster. I'd like to see more referendums on issues. I really would. But I think they've got to be fairly major issues. And I'm not saying enforced vaccination is not, but we're not quite at that point yet. Is what I would suggest.
Yeah. Well, families of the victims killed by Stephen Port have heard how an inquest jury revealed failings by the Metropolitan Police, which contributed to their deaths. Paul, tell us about your particular interest in this story.
Yeah, I've a very real interest in this story because I grew up in Barking where the murders happened, and I actually went to school with Stephen Port, the murderer, and spent 7 years or whatever it was at primary school.
Well, there you are on screen.
Yeah, that's him standing there in the back row and me in the front. So it was slightly chilling to learn, obviously, that somebody who was in your class at school has turned out to become one of Britain's worst serial killers. But the real story here, of course, is the massive institutional failings by the Metropolitan Police. I mean, it's a tragedy for the families of the victims to hear that the inquest jury has decided that 3 of the deaths were effectively preventable. You know, after the first murder, the following 3, had the police joined up the dots and investigated it properly and shown due diligence, could have prevented those murders. And actually, when you look at the details of the murders, it's incredible that they didn't join the dots. I mean, the victims, the next 3 victims were all found within the same churchyard, St Margaret's Churchyard in Barking, within a few months of each other. And how nobody at that point decided to think 3 young men, all dead in the same churchyard, all within a few months of each other, there's clearly a connection. But they didn't. And there's an argument to say potentially, and the jury wasn't asked to consider it, but there's an argument to say potentially there was a degree of homophobia, possibly in the way that the police approached the case. Had it been a young blonde-haired woman, had one of the victims been a young blonde-haired woman, would they have treated it more seriously? Would they have assigned more officers to it, investigated it more thoroughly? I don't know, but those questions are being asked. But I think the wider question as well is, in many respects, are the police fit for purpose now on this sort of stuff? I mean, I think people are asking questions about the ability of the police to be able to deal with day-to-day crimes, serious crimes and minor low-level crimes. And, you know, the problem is now, I think, the police are so diverted into other things where they've almost become social workers in some respects. You don't really see police on the beat anymore. You don't really see them challenging antisocial behaviour, burglaries, stuff like that. And when something major like this happens and they're exposed to have failed in a massive way, those questions will come again, and they've clearly got some questions to face, and they have to give some answers to those questions.
Well, dare I say, Paul, up to 1,000 Metropolitan Police officers dealing with online hate crimes.
It's crazy. I mean, it's crazy. We seem to now, or the police seem to now, attribute so much time to worrying about people's hurt feelings than they do to the stuff that really affects people. You know, a drug dealer on the corner of my street, someone's just burgled my house, someone's just stolen my car. All of that seems to get relegated. And you see the police now on social media constantly flaunting their woke credentials.
Yes.
And OK, you know, there's a place for that sort of stuff, but it seems to be the preoccupation of the police force now. And I think people are getting fed up.
But it does, and it's a different prioritisation, isn't it? Because actually what we're saying is, if I say horrible things about you that can be interpreted in a misogynistic way or whatever it is, that is somehow worse than physically doing something wrong.
It's crazy.
And that's where things have changed, certainly in my lifetime.
And the truth is, you know, no one has the right to not be offended. You know, I'm not in favour of people gratuitously offending each other. I don't think there's any need for that, but it shouldn't be against the law. But look, if you take offence because someone has expressed a genuine political or moral opinion, then the problem's with you. If you're the one taking offence, the problem's with you. You know, the idea that you can say, I'm offended, and that's a clincher in the debate, and the other person shouldn't say anymore.
I know. Well,
that's
look at Durham University.
That exists.
Look at what's going on at Durham University after Rod Little's visit. I mean, it is astonishing. Now, some people are questioning the necessity for red list travel restrictions when Omicron variant cases are already spreading across the UK. How can the government justify charging over £2,000 quarantine for hotels? Now, we're told this will come to an end. We don't quite know why. I was struck this weekend by a case, a friend of a friend, a man called Norman Bunyard, a former soldier, a former police sergeant. He's 80. He lives on his own, and he went to South Africa to see his daughter, who, of course, he hadn't seen for 2 years, like so many people during this pandemic. He's out there. In the middle of all of this, Omicron hits. He comes back, and he's put into a Holiday Inn near Heathrow Airport, which you can go online now, by the way, and book a room for £78 a night. But he, as a pensioner aged 80 on a fairly modest pension, is being charged £228 a night. It's like being in a prison. The food is dreadful. He can't even get a newspaper because there's no one there to help him. And I have to say, once again, just as with, and there's the way Norman's been treated, but there's something bigger going on here, isn't there? There's the award of PPE contracts. Who's making the difference between £78 a night
Yeah.
and £228 a night. And why has the whole test and trace regime now cost the taxpayer £40 billion? And I really hope one day, after all of this, there is a proper investigation into what has happened to billions of pounds of our money. And let's see who the profiteers have been. And let's see those that have worked inside government or Whitehall that have perhaps, should we say, maybe helped friends of theirs win lucrative contracts. I hope there is a reckoning after all of this. I feel very strongly about it, Arlene.
No, well, I can imagine. I mean, 80 years of age, can't even get a newspaper to read, eating dreadful food. I think it's awful.
And you know, most people I've spoken to at that age are really uncomfortable with a lot of the restrictions because, you know, some of them have said to me, I'm at the end of my life anyway, or nearing the end of my life anyway. If it's a choice between taking the health risk and you know, seeing my daughter or my son or people being separated from their loved ones, I think the vast majority would say, look, I'll take the risk. Family is more important to me. But some of the stuff we've been doing, I think, is inhuman. You see some of the videos online where even people who have been married for years, but you know, may have been living in separately in establishments, in nursing homes or whatever, couldn't see each other for months and months, and then all of a sudden they're reunited. I mean, I think stuff like that is so callous, and we need to think about that before imposing.
On the care homes point as well, there's been new guidance issued, hasn't there, saying it's a maximum now of 3 named visitors for each resident in a care home. Where did that come from?
And who chose the number and how does it all work? I just
all
don't
arbitrary.
know. I just don't know. Now, the High Court has ruled WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange can be extradited to the US from the UK. Assange is wanted by the US for publishing thousands of secret documents in 2010 and 2011. And we also have heard since this announcement in the Sunday papers that Assange has suffered some kind of a stroke. I went to meet Assange in 2016, 17. I went to meet Assange at the embassy where he'd been holed up, and we had a conversation about various things. It all, of course, was completely misinterpreted by the press, that I was somehow running secret, files between him and Trump. I mean, the whole thing was astonishing. I actually went because at the time I was working with LBC and they wanted to try and get me to do an interview with him. I guess, Arlene, if you're extradited to the USA on a charge like that, you never see light of day again, do you?
Well, I think they've been giving some reassurances to the judiciary here that they won't put him into a high-security prison. He's been in Belmarsh prison, as I understand it, which is quite incredible given the suicide risk that is there. Before that, of course, he was in the embassy in a sort of an open way, but obviously he's been in a sort of a lockdown situation for nearly, is it 10 years now?
Yes, he must be 10.
He was actually in Norfolk or Suffolk, I think it was, for a while, being holed up there. So it's a great number of years. I mean, I think the whole decision is appalling, I have to say. I think what we're seeing is a political extradition. This is somebody who, if he had done what he did as an American citizen, as an American journalist, would have been protected by the First Amendment. But because he's not an American citizen, apparently he's fair game. Now, what did he do? He released classified information which showed that the US was up to no good in all sorts of ways in terms of rendition and torture. It was hugely embarrassing for the United States government, but there you go. If you do that sort of stuff, you've got to risk it being uncovered at some point. Now, OK, he released it in a way that was a bit crude, but at the end of the day, that is what journalists do. They find when their governments or when governments across the world are doing wrong, and they expose it. And we've got this kind of extradition treaty, which I think was signed in 2003 between ourselves and America.
This is the Blair Treaty.
Yeah, which essentially allows America to demand that we extradite somebody who may not even have committed the crime in America. Maybe someone living in the UK and committed the alleged crime in the UK, but can still be effectively transported to America. So I think it's
that treaty is awful.
It's an appalling piece.
A friend of mine was extradited. A friend of mine, businessman, was extradited to the USA, and it was done. And there were a couple of court hearings. And when my friend's brief asked, would the Americans be presenting some prima facie evidence? The American response was, no, we don't need to.
And, you know...
I mean, that's how bad Patriti is.
Wow.
And this, I think, can only be seen. I mean, I'm not a great fan of Assange as a person. I mean, I have to say that. But that's, I mean, in many respects, that's not the point. But as I say, it's a political extradition, and it has to be seen, in my view, as an attack on journalistic freedom. You know, what will future journalists who discover something about the US government or another government, which is clearly highly sensitive, and they think about putting that in the public domain, in the public interest, but they think, Assange is now...
But there is a limit,
spending
Paul,
time.
isn't there? There is a limit. I mean, you could argue that there are some government secrets or some government things that may get hacked that perhaps it's inappropriate to put out. For example, the nuclear codes or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So all I would say with Assange and others like him is your basic general point I get, but I do think there are some limits to it.
And I accept that, but I don't think there's any evidence that with the information that Assange released, that it has led to the death of a single person.
Not in Assange's case.
In Assange's case. And, you know, the truth is what he released about the US and what it was up to was absolutely in the public interest. So it's a really serious issue, I think. And it's not being covered by the media, and it should be covered by the media of all people.
No, and they don't want
to
No, it's a story that they don't want to know about.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to